First, I want to thank you all for taking out time on this Friday afternoon to listen to a talk and have a conversation about refugees and the ability for them to be able to access play. So that's why I'm going to share my particular slides. My name is Mary Williams. I am a PhD student at the UCL College London at the Institute of Global Prosperity. I'm also the CEO of a social enterprise called Dream Networks that seeks to democratize play also. The key thing we're trying to really focus on over the next, say, 15 minutes is what position should refugees or do refugees have in terms of enabling more play, and how can we actually enable that through the co-design process. So we're all really aware that refugees, the actual refugee crisis potentially isn't even seen as a crisis. It's something that is reoccurring. It's becoming the real norm, a reality that we recognize that millions of people across the world are facing. Particularly right now, about 10 countries host over 50% of the refugees, and a lot of them reside in Kenya. And Kenya is the area which I'm going to be focusing on for my research. Within Kenya, urban refugees can often live in camps such as Kakuma, which is a very large camp that's been around for over 20 years. So people over 20 years, so generations of people have lived in Kakuma camp. And also they have urban refugees where people choose to not live in camps and they choose to live within the host community. And the people who do decide to live amongst the host community, they often lack certain access to rights. When I say rights, it may be lack of a right to be able to move between different borders. Also, they often have a lack of a right to complain about receiving lower income employment than their Kenyan counterparts. They also lack a right to certain basic services because of often related to their poverty on where they're situated in that environment. Within Kitengela, the focus of my research is looking at the Congolese. So Congolese have moved from Congo due to political unrest, violence, civil war for a number of years, and a significant amount of them who decide to stay in urban environments decide to go to Kitengela over the more recent years, so maybe around 10 years. And that's because one, they know a lot of people there, but also Kitengela is a place that is rapidly developing. Since 2009, the population has tripled and over 150,000 people right now live in Kitengela. It's been a significant increase in the population density, and with that brings more and more residential building, more and more businesses, and less space. So it's recognized that there's a lack of public open space in Kitengela, which used to be a place that actually was really well known for pastoral land, Massa people being able to herd cows. There's been so much development and in such a short time. And that could be seen as poor urban planning, but also the fact that there wasn't foresight to see it coming. This is not only isolated to a place such as Kitengela, places such as Beirut, which have had in Lebanon, where many Syrians have moved there, often they also have similar challenges. And it's also limited capacity of the government in terms of what they can do, in terms of enabling public space and being able to prioritize it. And we also recognize that children have a right to play. So there's a lack of public space. And like I mentioned, a lot of urban refugees lack certain rights, but children themselves have a significant right to play, whether they're refugee children or whether they're like Congolese or whether they're Kenyan. So what I'm realizing more and more now in the research is that by working for the marginalized, working with particularly the Congolese, we're designing for everybody. It's an inclusive model. By designing for them, we're designing for everybody, because actually everybody requires access to play. Everyone deserves access to play. But particularly in the refugee context, it's recognizing that the play spaces themselves can create a space where the children can feel like they belong and they can generate community. If you maybe just stop for 1 second and think back to when you were a child and you consider when you went into play space, maybe you ran over to a slide or a swing, you were swinging, enjoying your life, then you came off the swing and maybe somebody else came next to you and you maybe had a conversation with them. Maybe they liked your shoes or something along those lines, then you had a conversation, or maybe you swang next to each other and you had a competition in terms of how fast you're both going. You might even not share any language, but you feel as if you've got to know each other by having that intimate time of play. And that's the great thing about play. It can create numerous opportunities, whether language is used or not, for children to foster a sense of community and knowing other people. And also they use that environment, they can get a sense of actually belonging to that safe space, recognize that a space has been created for them. And that's particularly challenging when you're a refugee child, where you have insecurities in regards to having to move, regards to maybe not having enough space. So that's really important for children. Similarly, it's similar for parents. Parents find play areas to be a welcoming environment, where if they do decide that they're going to take their child to the play environment, and that's obviously a choice, depending on what context you're in, they can also feel as if they're more welcome to get to meet other parents. So it can be very useful for both, and that's something that we found from our research. It's recognizing also that a play area that is inclusive, that is inviting to everybody, doesn't need to have numerous different flashy, like a word features or be really colorful. It needs to cultivate certain experiences or opportunities, such as the work we do is looking at the 5 taxonomies that have been created by David Whitebird from Cambridge University, that looks at the physiological roots of play, and looking at physical play, looking at imaginative play, role play, games of rules, breaking play up into different categories and seeing how diverse opportunities of play can be created through these categories, as opposed to focusing purely on the equipment. Another thing that we really want to do is think about inclusion. The work we're doing, we try to, as much as possible, to work with more diverse range of children, but particularly children we've recognized who have autism or other disabilities. We are not able to easily access them. So we've been using more inclusive design principles to say, how can we use sensory type play to enable different forms of the play to occur that won't be restricted by somebody who has got limitation in physical mobility, and trying to think of how we can use these senses to engage more children in play. So I've been giving you some of the foundation in terms of design. I mentioned I'm the CEO of a social enterprise, and our focus is a lot on play and co-design. And that's really the heart of a lot of the work I do. But in particular in the PhD, I'm working with a social enterprise, a charity, a local charity called Xavier Project, and working with them to say, how can we understand how we can co-design to democratize play? So I'm going to introduce co-design to you. Co-design is really trying to see how can myself as a researcher or designer work with the user to be able to come up with the problem, come up with the solution. We do the whole process together, as opposed to me seeing myself as a designer or researcher, watching what they're doing, observing them, taking notes, and in isolation come up with a solution, engaging them through the whole process and enable them to have agency. And that's got challenges in regards to power dynamics. And that's something we're really trying to address in our methodology. One of the things we're also trying to do in terms of making the play area more inclusive is trying to focus the play area on actually spaces where majority of children are able to access play. So we focused on public spaces because the majority of children can access play there. There's only one public school in actually Kitengela. The rest of the schools are private fee-paying schools. And with COVID, that's been a big challenge because actually schools are closed for 9 months last year, and a lot of the private schools closed down. So we want the children to be able to access play, the majority of children, to focus on public spaces. And as I mentioned, that quite a few schools closed down. So in terms of our process, we started with the problem. We believe the problem is that there needs to be more play spaces. That's what we observed. So, but we're going to, like I mentioned, work with the actual community, the users themselves. So our first stage is we've been working with citizen scientists. These are 2 local researchers I worked with and trained up in research methodologies, and we've worked together and learned from each other in terms of how can we actually understand what prevents and enables children to play. We've then worked with the children to do questionnaires, surveys, role-playing, focus groups, drawing, a wide range of more inclusive methodology to say, how can you engage in the process of understanding what the problem is, and how can you challenge the problem? How can you help us to understand it more? So we've done a range of different things that has been really fruitful with the over 200 participants we've had. I'm showing you a picture here of a girl who took a photo of a ball, and that's saying that she liked to play with in her environment. And we then later on categorized, and I right now are doing a thematic analysis on the different types of ways the children played based on our observations and also what they said or what they even acted out. We also did affinity mapping with the parents, where we tried to understand what factors are enabling and preventing children to play, and then try to say, how can we group these into economic, social, or environmental, or even maybe not be able to group them into what we typically take to be factors for play. But one of the key things they said is there's a misconception that they don't value play. They do value play, but what they recognize that they need somewhere safe and secure for their children to play, specifically if they're not necessarily going to be there with their children when they're playing. The children go to school by themselves, then they want to stop in their play area. The parents might not be there. They want a space that is safe. So we need to recognize, and what we are recognizing, and that's key to co-design, what their cultural behavior is and how our design should be impacted by that, and also our research methods. So we looked at a different range of spaces over a space that is about a 1 mile radius, and we focused on open spaces that are mixed spaces, mixed use, they are ground or they're grass. But we initially did an assessment looking at all the different spaces, so places such as schools or looking at roads, etc., where children we saw playing. We then worked with the local researchers to say actually what characteristics do the actual users and also the parents value in terms of having a space that they want to use for play. And the key thing that came up often was, again, associated with safety. They need to have informal and formal supervision. They want to have somewhere that has obvious physical boundaries. Again, that's associated with safety. So that's something that we really want to design in, and maybe not something we necessarily realize would be such a big factor, but actually it's a factor in the UK, it's a factor across the world. Play needs to be safe. But then we started to look at the spaces. What we recognized, if you look at the urban space, the open space that is grass and other in the image on the left, you can see, similar to the image below, that it was important that there are residential buildings or there are businesses that where the children could be supervised, and they saw that to be valuable. But as you can also see in the mixed use open space, it's dirty, there's litter, that could also be a safety issue. And if you look at the road, obviously a road is not a safe place to play. And one thing that was mentioned when we met with the UNHCR, the road and places like that aren't safe places to play. But actually, if you look at this, you can see that as much as they may prefer to have a designated play space, somebody who may be an outsider, when I say outsider, maybe not situated within the community, the road is a place where there's businesses, there's residential buildings where there is supervision. So we obviously don't want to design a player in a road, but we want to recognize what features are existing there that can actually be cultivated in the space we do design in. So I'm going to talk to you a few about some of the opportunities that were highlighted with regards to play. One thing that's great, as I mentioned, a lot of parents and teachers that we interviewed and did focus groups with really highlighted that they really felt play was important. It was important for physical activity, for socializing, and hopefully through the work we're doing in the next stage in terms of co-designing with the children, we're going to even open up the opportunities that be created through play. One thing that was also said was that one of the teachers told us that she told her child to do an errand, do the dishes, and the son said, no, I'm sorry, I was told at school I've got a right to play, I'm going to go and play. That's fantastic. The children even themselves recognize that. But how can we create a space in the environment that actually enables them to say, I recognize it, and there's the spaces I can go to. And the parents also feel as if they can enable their children to access that space. And also one of the key things that came out was the diversity in the play opportunities, based on the fact that a lot of the children use objects, and they were manipulating the objects and doing different things, doing physical activity objects, doing symbolic play of objects. One thing that came out of one of the workshops, one of the children came forward to do role play in terms of answering one of the questions, and he was dancing, and he then said, I want to use my play area to develop my talents. And it was interesting because he'd written talent in his questionnaire, and he then acted it out, and then we wanted to understand more, so asked him more open questions, and this came out of the fact that he felt if he had a space where he could dance safely amongst his friends, he would be able to develop himself. That's fantastic. That's the diversity that we want to see in the play area. And this image is of a boy who actually, similar like I mentioned regarding objects, the object that he was using a lot was his tire. Initially, he was walking a tire, and he sat down on it. Then later on, he decided to start playing with the material around the tire. Then some other children, as you can see on the image on the right, saw him playing with the different materials, then said, oh, actually, I'm going to join in. And they had a conversation. What I thought was fantastic about this is that these children are school age, but they're not in school. But through having a play space that they've created themselves, they're able to have conversation and potentially feel like they're more stable and feel more happy and more joyful. But as you can see, the environment around them is not necessarily what you deem as a safe and a good space for a child to play. So again, how can we foster what we know from the children's observations, what we've been learning from them, and say within your environment, what tweaks do we want to make together to be able to cultivate a better space to play? what I've started to do is create a kind of mapping methodology where we look at the behaviours that are occurring around this space. And this is the space that the child was, that I mentioned in the previous slide, was at. And it was next to the school. But next to school, there's a field. And we observed that area at different times of the day, on different days of the week. And we recognized that children use this space quite a lot. It was well situated in terms of supervision, being next to school, being next to residential buildings, but it had the challenge of litter again. So that's something to address. And then also the children were using objects, and a lot of the objects they were using were objects that they found in that local space. But also when they had the ball, they would use the ball. So object play, maybe because of that, potentially people could say its limitations, it means that they only use what's around them, but recognizing the fact that using what's around them is a really fantastic way to be able to engage in different types of play, social play, accessible play. And again, thinking, how can we foster this? How can we develop this? Object play is fantastic. I'm an engineer. It's great for creativity. It's great for the manipulation. It's great for cognitive skills, but it's also diverse in terms of what can be done with the objects. So talking about a few objects again, tires, highlighted the fact that the child used it before, but also social play is engaged with tires, mastery play, numerous forms of play. In the middle, you can see a child, three group of children. One girl is pretending that she's potentially sweeping by using some recycled object underneath the floor, or you could potentially call it rubbish, like a newspaper article. Then two boys are then doing engaging with play together, and they're trying to balance themselves on small little wheels. So this is great for development, also just for the fun of it. It looks like something I would be involved in if I was that size. And again, using a ball, but the children brought up balls again and again. It could be limited, it could be based on limitations of materials, but key things that this children use balls to engage in social play, physical activity. The thing I'm really trying to highlight is that these objects that the children are using actually address so many diverse play opportunities. They're inclusive, they're accessible. So these are great things that we want to really try and foster and create more in the play space and environment we design in next stage. So really recognizing that we want to create play that has enables more multiple uses, is diverse, potentially we'll be using objects, but also thinking about the cultural perceptions of safety and quality. We don't want to create something that people, the parents potentially don't see as good, because then maybe they will not let their children go there. So it's really, right now we're looking at perception of quality and what is safe. Some things are obviously not safe. How can we design a space to reduce litter? And that's something that can be something potentially something quite simple. Such as just hiring someone to clean up the space. So what next? We're at the stage where we're developing ideas with children themselves in co-design workshops, and then we're going to be prototyping them with different modeling methods. And I've left my email address because I'm really happy for you to have a conversation with me to understand more about methodology and even challenge some of it. Then we're going to test it by doing a temporary installation of the play space, looking at the designs the children have created and how can we cultivate space around objects and around a space that is safe and that is accessible for all. So thank you very much for your time. Please feel free to email me or follow me on Twitter or on Instagram. And yes, I'm really looking forward to hearing the other two presenters. Thank you.